Okay, we're going to talk about some interior finishes today. And I'm not putting finish on like a bookshelf or a desktop or something like that today. I'm kind of keeping it small. I'm going to be putting finishes on some screwdriver handles. So I've been making screwdrivers, and what you do is you put the piece of wood in a lathe and you got to drill a couple holes. There's actually 2 holes inside there. And then you turn the outside and sand it and get yourself a screwdriver handle. You can buy kits of these parts here, and these parts are a bushing that gets epoxied into the end of that handle, and then this is a replacement or a interchangeable screwdriver handle. So that gets pressed and epoxied in there. That comes out and you can switch these things around. Kind of a fun little project. We'll be talking more about these later. Okay. All right, so quick little bit about this. Shellac. Shellac is a really good finish for just putting a quick clear coat on wood. It absorbs in a lot. It's actually a more natural finish. It is denatured alcohol and is mixed with what's called shellac. And shellac is a resin that comes from a beetle called a shellac beetle. And you dissolve that resin into the denatured alcohol, and then you can spray it on. The problem is it's not very durable. If this can dissolve in alcohol and you spill like a alcoholic beverage on it, it'll dissolve the finish. So it's not a great finish for something like a table. But it is good for like little craft projects and stuff. I'm not going to be using it here though, because people are going to be holding these in their hands and working on projects with them. It doesn't hold up that well. Spar varnish. You could have this in brush on, or you could have it in spray can. Comes in water based and oil based. This works great. Basically what it is essentially the same thing as polyurethane, except it has ingredients in here that allow that finish to be a little bit flexible, a little bit stretchy. So that way, as your wood gets wet, if it was a project for outdoors and it expands and contracts, then it stands up to that. It also works really well for defense against ultraviolet light. And so things that are going to be out in the sun, this provides a good finish for that. Good example of that is your front door. If your front door is wood, use a spar varnish to finish it, and it'll last a lot longer than something like a polyurethane. Lacquer. It's a clear finish. You spray it on. The one thing that's weird about this, and we talked about this in the metal finishing video, it fuses into previous coats of lacquer. So if you put several coats of lacquer on there, in reality you only have one thick coat, and that can be a little bit dangerous, because when you have a vertical surface or something and you get that last coat on, sometimes that's the straw that broke the camel's back, and it all fuses together, and now the weight of that thick single layer just causes it to sag. Then we have our spar varnish that is water-based. So a little bit about this stuff. It's a little more environmentally friendly. It's a little more student-friendly and shop-friendly in that it's water-based, cleans up a little bit easier. One thing that's unique, see, I'm already using the screwdriver. One thing that's unique about these water-based finishes is they look like milk. And that actually can be a really good thing. One, you want to make sure you stir it up, and this actually is already really well stirred up. I don't have any blobs on the little stick, but stir that up really good. You don't want to shake it. If you shake a finish, then what happens is you introduce air into it, and then when you spread it out over a thin layer on your project, then what ends up happening is all those bubbles come out of the finish, and you end up with a rough texture on there. So I'm going to be putting this water-based finish on one of these screwdriver handles. So I have this one here. This is actually out of hickory, which is kind of neat. I made this one out of an old shovel handle that broke. I'm using just little flux brushes, but something like a foam brush works really well for this. And I'm just going to paint it on. And one of the things that you could probably see right here is if you put it on too heavy, you're going to be able to see that milkiness, and that's a big benefit to having that in a water-based finish, is that it allows you to see where you have sags and drips and stuff. Right now I'm not worried about the sags and drips, I'm just worried about getting it on there. So I'm going to paint this stuff on. I want to get it on the wood first, and then I'm going to brush it out and make it smooth and all that good stuff. I'm not going to be putting finish inside this because I want the epoxy to adhere to the wood when I go to put that interior part in there. Okay, so you can see I have it on there pretty heavy. I'm going to continue putting this on here. Okay, now I want to brush this out, and always brush it out with the grain. Now this is a water-based product. It'll actually dry relatively quickly. Never ever rush a finish though. That's the worst thing that you could do, because the next step after this, after it dries, is to give it a quick sanding to knock off any of the roughness that might have happened when it dried. And so I brushed this out pretty good. I want it now to dry. Let it dry overnight. I don't care what it says on the can. Let it dry overnight. Don't get impatient. So I'm going to let that sit, and I'm going to just keep an eye out for drips and sags and things like that. Those little liquid waterfalls that just kind of, or avalanches that build up. And I'm going to brush those out. I'm going to keep an eye on that for 15 minutes or so. When this is all dry, so tomorrow, I'm going to give it a quick sanding. I'm going to put another coat on. I'm going to put at least 2 coats, if not 3 or 4, just depending on how I want that finish to build up and how much of a surface film I want to be on there. Speaking of surface films, something that doesn't always create a surface film is an oil finish. And our next one here is Danish oil. Wonderful finish, makes the wood just look amazing. However, it's not the most durable, and if you want it to have a smooth surface, in other words, not the texture of wood, but a smooth surface, you've got to put multiple coats of this stuff on here. So this is their natural color, and what that means is it's not tinted. Some Danish oils come in different colors, and so they're almost like using a stain. If you wanted to do that, you could. It's kind of like stain and finish all in one. There's no shaking or anything like that. I'm going to actually have a little paper towel here. I have a little plastic cup, and I'm going to just put a little bit of this Danish oil in there. And so Danish oil, it goes on and it soaks into the wood a lot like a stain, but then it dries, and as it dries, then it leaves a little bit of a surface finish, and more coats start building that finish up. It usually just makes the wood look amazing. Oh, look at that. This piece of wood on this handle, this is olive. Olive is one of my favorite woods to use on a lathe. I swear it has the consistency of like a stick of butter, so it just cuts on a lathe so well, and it has some crazy looking grain and tends to look really nice. So with Danish oil, it's kind of like a stain. I'm going to put this on, and I'm going to keep this wet, and I'm going to let this soak in for about 15 minutes or so. And I'm going to keep applying it during that 15 minutes, just really to keep this all wet. At the end of that 15 minutes, then I'm going to try to rub it all off, which of course I'm not going to be able to, but you're basically making sure that you get all the excess wiped off. So you rub that dry after about 15 minutes, then I'm going to let it dry overnight. Tomorrow, Give it a quick wipe down, maybe a very, very light sanding, some really fine sandpaper, and then do it all again. So then I would put more oil, more Danish oil on it, keep it wet for about 15 minutes, wipe it all dry, let it dry overnight. And you keep doing that until you get the finish that you really like. Lastly, we have oil-based polyurethane. This is, I think, the best finish for most things that you're going to be making for inside your house. Really, really durable stuff. If I was making a tabletop, I wouldn't hesitate putting polyurethane on it. I wouldn't even consider another finish. And apparently it really seals lids on cans quite well, because this one is just fighting me. You can use a stir stick, and you may even be able to see down there. It's kind of murky. There's, see that yellow chunky booger looking thing? That is the actual resin that is in the finish. And so we want to get that all stirred up. So I'm really scraping the bottom of this. I don't want to shake it. Remember, stirred, not shaken. James Bond was wrong. And I'm going to continue. Okay, so now that's all stirred up. I did get a little bit of air in there, but I think we're going to be okay. So really nice finish. You could think about this as being like a Danish oil, except with more of a surface film being produced rather than soaking into the wood. So Danish oil soaks into the wood, barely forms a surface finish. This doesn't soak into the wood as much, but it forms a really nice, durable surface finish. This particular one, by the way, is clear satin, which means there's just a little bit of a shininess to it when it's done. There's also semi-gloss, which is shinier, and then there's gloss, which is really shiny. Nevertheless, you still would be putting several coats on there, like probably 3 coats to really get good protection, really build up a nice surface. I'll take this on here. Probably shouldn't have put it right on the top of the screwdriver to begin with. That was kind of dumb. Now where are you going to hold it? Take my pencil here. Bloop. That is pretty good. You can see there's a drip coming down here. It's dripping off there. So what? Leave it alone. Let this sit just a moment. Soak in as much as it can, and then brush it out to even it and get rid of any sags. Keep looking for those sags and drips and all that stuff. Then we're going to let it dry. We're going to treat it much the same way as that Danish oil. I'll let it dry overnight. Come back, light sanding, more finish on there. Watch for sags. Let it dry overnight, and so on. Then get all the way up to 3 coats. That's going to be nice and pretty. So there's some really good finishes there. We got our spar urethane on here that is water-based. I'm going to give that a final little brushing to make it smooth before leaving it. We've got our Danish oil that's all soaking in just a little bit. I'm going to apply a little bit more, and then shortly after that I'm going to be wiping everything off. Lastly, we have our polyurethane, which is dripping right now. That's okay. I'm going to brush it all smooth before letting it dry overnight and doing more coats later. Hope you learned something. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.